Realism has become a major appeal to the video game market. Realistic graphics, more authentic mechanics, how might this look and feel in real life becomes an incredible tool for creating immersive experiences. And the FPS genre is one of the most exciting testbeds for highly realistic games. Today we're taking a look at 10 of the most realistic FPS games ever made. And what better place to start than a game that is attempting to recreate the realistic recording of a real experience? That game is Body Cam. A few years ago, a teaser trailer for an upcoming game called Unrecord went viral. It featured realistic-looking body cam style footage for FPS gameplay with insane lighting and realistic environments. Unfortunately though, Unrecord still seems like it's a few years away from being released, but the success of that teaser has since inspired a whole wave of body cam games. And our first game, simply titled Body Cam, is probably at the top of the stack for when it comes to what it's accomplished. It's mainly a PvP experience with a variety of modes like classic bomb defusal, TDM, and even a zombie survival experience. Not too exciting of a feature set on its own, but the catch is just how accurately it depicts body cam combat footage. And while most games we're looking at today will strive to simulate the real world as accurately as possible, body cam adds another layer of complication on top of that by also simulating the effects of a chest-worn camera. The audio has that distinct action cam distortion. The lens is dirty and warps the world. Your character's arms have weight and momentum, and it all blends together kind of seamlessly into a gritty and incredibly intense experience. In fact, that washed out camera look does an incredible job of sort of masking some of the complications of trying to make an otherwise photorealistic looking game. And in fact, body cam feels so realistic that you could argue it's kind of a detriment to gameplay at points. The dedication to an accurate simulation of a otherwise cheap body cam means that the game is built around a lo-fi aesthetic, and after a few matches, my ears are ringing and my stomach is churning. Still, it's a really cool game, especially for something initially developed by two college-age guys. And what's even crazier is that they're currently overhauling the entire animation system to make it even more realistic with procedural reloads, advanced hand animations, and even status-based effects like stress causing shakier handling or even failures to reload. Now, unlike Body Cam, Ready or Not keeps things at eye level, while still delivering an experience that mimics real close-quarter combat on a level that few games can touch. This is a tactical PvE game where you play a SWAT agent on duty, breaking down doors, clearing rooms, and attempting to take suspects down peacefully. It's one of the most tense and grounded games on this list, and it steers as far away from crutch mechanics as possible. It's just you, your squad mates, and the gear that you carry with you. If you get shot, there's no healing yourself back to full health, assuming you even survive that shot. Ready or Not is absolutely brutal in its depiction of realistic gunfights, and you need to rely on real-world tactics and a slew of gadgets to survive. Shooting your way through an active crime scene just isn't a realistic game plan here. And one of the lesser talked about things that really adds to Ready or Not's sense of realism is the actual story behind the missions. The opening mission has you locking down a gas station, very similar to the game that Ready or Not was heavily inspired by, SWAT 4. And it seems pretty routine, but subtle hints about a broader conspiracy involving government psyops, rogue agencies, terrorist cells, and heinous criminal acts slowly reveals a much darker and more morally gray narrative, tying everything together. This is the kind of mature and nuanced storytelling most Cops vs. Robbers games just gloss over to be more mainstream friendly, but Ready or Not tackles some of the most harrowing crimes head on. Sometimes it even makes me question if we should really have active shooter missions that clearly fictionalize real-world events, but I think that's as much a testament to the game's dedication to realism as it is anything else. Now, this next game, 6 Days in Fallujah, generated a lot of debate for portraying such a recent and controversial conflict, but it also offers one of the most realistic feeling tactical shooter experiences out there. It's got incredible sound design and a brutal damage model that makes every firefight feel both authentic and terrifying. The mission scenarios are also really grounded and gritty, not relying on big set-piece cinematics, but instead down in the dirt fighting. But one of the most realistic factors of this game is just how it depicts the general uncertainty and chaos of the real-world conflict. Every time you load into a mission, the layouts, buildings, threats, and enemy positions are procedurally reshuffled, so you never get a chance to memorize a level. It creates a dynamic where you never know what's around the next corner. Instead of memorizing your maps, you instead have to rely on your instincts and your tactics to stay alive. A lot of games on this list are balanced around their gunfights and wins or losses, but 6 Days in Fallujah feels like it's first and foremost about the brutality of conflict, and then it concerns itself with making the experience challenging and balanced. Authenticity was what set Insurgency Sandstorm apart from all other shooters when it first came out. And to this day, it remains as one of the most realistic and accessible tactical FPS games ever made. It was originally a big mod back in the mid-2000s that spawned a commercial remake and then Sandstorm, which is as much a sequel as it is a remaster of everything that came before it. All those years of refinement pay off when you jump into this game. The weapon models, sounds, and handling all feels incredible. The maps suit the gameplay but still feel like real-world locations. The audio design is brutally loud, punctuating every gunfight and helicopter assault with hair-raising screams and explosions. If you're looking for a tactical PvP FPS experience, Insurgency Sandstorm is basically the de facto entry point. You don't need to learn all kinds of new complex mechanics. Basic shooter know-how will get you started, but the realism of this game will quickly put your run and gun tactics in their place. On top of all of that, it also has extensive mod support, including VR mods. Playing Insurgency Sandstorm in VR was one of the most immersive gameplay experiences I've ever had. If ever there was a perfect candidate for a VR tactical shooter, Sandstorm is it. The game offers a level of detail in specific locations that set it apart from traditional milsims, but unlike those games, it doesn't have a learning curve steeper than a rocket launch. Now, when it comes to the next few games, these titles manage to portray incredible realism, world design, and survival mechanics, but in totally fictional settings. Starting off with Hunt Showdown, one of the most atmospheric extraction-style shooters around. This is sort of a, hey, what if the people who made Crysis and pioneered a lot of modern video game graphic techniques also made an extraction shooter with paranormal elements, zombies, and horrifying monsters? That was also set in the 1890s American South. Certainly not the most obvious premise, but when you play it, the goal and design becomes clear. Crytek took many historical weapons and recreated them to an insane level of detail and put them in a game world with some of the most realistic audio in a multiplayer FPS experience. It's so good they even have a menu for testing what all the guns sound like at different ranges, as their sound becomes muffled by the atmosphere and environment at further and further distances. This was one of the first games to really popularize the idea of sound traps. Stepping on a branch makes a loud crack, or moving quickly near some birds sets them off into the air, alerting everybody nearby. The realism in Hunt comes from a world that reacts to you, and in that reaction it creates some of the best player tracking mechanics in any game. Period. Sometimes all you have to do is sit, wait, and listen, and the world will tell you what's happening all around. Even when compared to games that try to do everything as real as possible, Hunt still has some of the most realistic soundscape design, period. If there's one game that could be crowned the grandfather of survival games, that is DayZ. And while DayZ may not have the most cutting-edge realistic graphics of modern games, its commitment to brutal survival systems and player-driven social systems is what makes it inarguably the most realistic PvP survival game available today. You spawn with nothing, and in minutes you're basically freezing, starving, and running for your life from a pack of roaming zombies. Most of the mechanics feel like they're ripped out of a survival manual. You don't walk up to a pile of sticks on the ground and hit a make fire button in DayZ. You build fires using kindling, fuel, a flame source, and then you have to keep feeding them or they go out. On top of that, wind and rain can put the fire out or even make them impossible to start in the first place. This attention to detail and interactive realism is all over DayZ. Sometimes it almost feels like a real-world survival training simulator, but with gameplay thrown in on top of that for a fun experience. And when every resource is so scarce that death is always just one wrong decision away. Every time you escape that death, it is worth throwing a party for. The rush of finding your first gun and bullets in DayZ is probably a core memory for millions of gamers. And the persistent world mechanics and the extremely high stakes engagements lead to some crazy social interactions that seem to realistically portray what an apocalyptic environment might actually be like when you meet other people. And that's something that's traditionally been very hard to evoke in a video game, but DayZ has absolutely mastered it. Now, many games have taken the DayZ formula and evolved it into their own style of game. Gray Zone Warfare is one of those games, which is a tactical extraction shooter set in a sprawling jungle. This game has some of the most realistic looking natural landscapes ever depicted in a game, and it backs up those visuals with realistic bullet physics that simulate everything down to how round fragments through different surfaces. The gunplay, especially against tough AI enemies and other players, is brutal and sharp, with a single bullet separating you from your loot if you're not careful. But Gray Zone's realistic graphics and physics are only half of what makes it so real. The other half is a key but very simple innovation. Instead of loading into timed raids, Gray Zone drops all of its players into a persistent open world with no loading screens. From the moment you spawn for the first time, you have the freedom to walk across the entire map and visit even endgame locations. The incredible visuals, dedication to realistic weapons, survival mechanics, and its always-on persistent world makes Gray Zone stand out as a game that takes realism very seriously. Now, with all that said, sometimes there's just no substitute for the original sauce. Escape from Tarkov is the OG extraction shooter that pretty much every other game in the genre lives in the shadow of. If you make an extraction shooter today, or probably even 20 years from now, if we're being honest, it'll probably be compared to Tarkov. Like most deeply immersive tactical FPS games, Tarkov has realistic looking environments and great sound design, but unlike a lot of other games, it lets you absolutely break a gun down to its bare essentials and rebuild it into whatever you want. Most other games would be afraid to let you swap out triggers and springs, but not Tarkov. You can slap 5 scopes on your weapon or turn it into a laser flashlight. Most games limit what attachments you could put onto a gun, but Tarkov takes the if it fits approach, letting you kit out a gun with all the Gucci gear you can imagine. Tarkov's weapon customization is a huge part of why it remains so successful for so many years. The guns become an extension of your character, and with the risk being so high, the way you move and approach situations ends up reflecting realistic combat incredibly well. It's all about that risk-reward mechanic simulating realistic human behavior, and Tarkov seems to have mastered it. Now, this next game really does some of the best job of simulating realistic teamwork, and that game is Squad. If Insurgency Sandstorm is the accessible entry point to hardcore tactical FPS games, Squad is the same for milsims. It distills all of the classic milsim tropes down to their core elements. Sprawlingly massive maps, a heavy reliance on transport vehicles, supply economics, and realistic strategy that you might only find in other games like, say, Arma, but it makes them all far more accessible. You don't need to memorize every button on a full-scale keyboard to be effective in Squad. But you're also not in the realism kiddie pool either. What makes Squad so realistic is that it authentically replicates real-world locations, weapons, and vehicles, but most importantly, replicates the need and importance of communicating with a full squad. Sometimes you end up just shooting the shit with your squad mates while you guard an objective that's not under attack. Other times you're yelling out orders in the heat of combat and throwing smoke to save down teammates. The realistic experience of a large-scale combat scenario is here on all fronts. Now, this final pick seems like the culmination of 20 years of milsim gaming history, and it's also a personal favorite of mine in a genre I was never particularly fond of until, well, this game came along. That game is Arma Reforger, and when I first loaded it up, I was blown away by just how realistic it felt. There are more photorealistic games out there, but Reforger just has that X factor, with its graphics that make every battle at every time of day look like a war film. The gameplay also injects many realistic combat mechanics, but doesn't make them so complex that they're now inaccessible. You don't just throw down a mortar and place a crosshair on a minimap to rack up kills. You have to use your compass, map, and a ruler to calculate the angle of your mortar tube. Likewise, all of the weapons handle realistically, with assault rifles recoiling wildly if you you've been running or you try to fire them in full auto without supporting the gun on a surface. Even small details like the rangefinders built into sniper scopes are near perfect recreations of the real thing in both look and function. I did a guide on loadouts for this game and had an entire section dedicated to how to use the rangefinders correctly. And fueling this realism even further are Reforger's players. The proximity and radio chat in Reforger is practically a casting call for the next great actor in a historical war drama. Squad leaders will do radio orders while you shoot the shit with some guy that you've never met before, waiting for the sunrise so you can actually see the enemies in their base and conduct an effective assault against them. Reforger doesn't dumb down the milsim, but instead manages to keep all the important aspects intact while fixing the onboarding problems of the past Arma games. Plus, it has an insane level of mod support that lets players turn it into the world's most content-rich milsim experience around. Right now, their server's running multi-day conflicts where you might go to bed on the losing team and wake up to a scrappy squad turning the tide of battle. It's insane how authentic this game feels, especially when it's sort of pitched as a stepping stone to the next major Arma experience. I really can't wait to see what the future of Arma looks like. Now, if you enjoyed this top 10 video, don't forget to drop me a like, but also up next, I think you might enjoy this top 10 mods video on games that started off as mods and then became some of the biggest games in the world. It's a pretty cool look back at gaming history. I think you'll enjoy it. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. This is Level Cap signing off.